higher than you used to when I was 16, I'll tell you. 10 years ago tonight, there were about 400,000 people in Bethel, New York, on a dairy farm there. They were there for a music and arts festival that was destined to make history. You're right, it was called Woodstock. And 10 years after the three-day celebration that wound up including 400 LSD freakouts, 3 deaths, and 2 births, people have been working to have Woodstock too. Tonight, first up, Mr. John Morris, who would have been the producer of that event, is here to explain why it didn't happen and to talk about how things have changed, in his view, since he was the original stage manager for Woodstock 1, which, as I say, took place 10 years ago tonight. We have a long show tonight. Mr. Gary Null is here, who has the first in a series of 4 articles in the current issue of Penthouse magazine describing how, in his view, some possible cancer cures are being suppressed by the medical establishment. We have a medical doctor with us tonight, if I can get the card out here, this big type here, Dr. Joseph Gold, a former professor of pathology and immunology, who is now the director of cancer research at the Syracuse, New York Research Institute for Cancer. And last up tonight, we have a gentleman, Dr. Ronald Jay Cohen, who has written a book. It's got a long title here. I'll just call it Binge here in the interest of time. It's a book about how to stop eating when you really don't have to eat. We've all heard the term food binge, and it's his view that many of us do that for reasons that have nothing at all to do with being hungry, and we will get into it a little bit later on. But first up, the gentleman who was the stage manager for Woodstock 10 years ago tonight, Mr. John Morris. We'll be right back with him after these words from our sponsors.
These days, you just can't get an old-fashioned bean with ham soup like mine.
Chunky makes an old-fashioned bean with ham soup.
Filled with nice, tender beans.
Filled with nice, tender beans.
And chunks of ham.
And chunks of ham.
Mine's so chunky, you'll be tempted to eat it with a fork.
Same here, but this chunky's so delicious.
It's a matter of education. If you were a cancer patient, what would you care whether you had this malignancy all your life if you lived a normal life?
To be 75 or 80 years
That's right,
old.
just
Well,
like
make it 100.
diabetics do, taking insulin. They never get rid of their diabetes. We have to push forward new ideas, new inroads. It's very important instead of sticking to the same old thing.
Listen, we have more material here than I have time for, but Mr. Null's articles are appearing. They're starting this month in the Penthouse magazine, and people who want them will find them. Believe me on that. I just have to move along here, but thank you, Mr. Gary Null, for being here tonight, and thank you, Dr. Joseph Gold, for being with us this evening. Now these announcements for the NBC television stations.
Can you pick new Folgers crystals? Let's see if Rose Falabella can.
Take a look at these 3 spoons and tell me which is the new coffee, just by looking.
The middle one.
Okay, you chose new Folgers coffee crystals. How would you describe the middle one?
Rich looking in color.
The important thing about coffee is...
If it tastes rich.
Folgers carpet is reduced to a beautiful $5 a yard. Why, that's 20 to 50% lower than our usual low prices. Time's up, Don.
It's like having an uncle in the carpet business?
That's it! Ready Cut Carpets. It's like having an uncle in the carpet business.
As I said at the beginning of our show tonight, we have psychologist Dr. Ronald Jay Cohen, who has written a new book with the title Binge. It's not a state of hunger, but a state of mind. He believes it's easy to go on a diet and take off weight. What's hard to do, he says, and this is fairly obvious, is to keep the weight off and not put it on back on sooner or later. He thinks he knows a way to stop the food binge. I'm rushing to get this damn commercial. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors with Dr. Ronald Jay Cohen. Stay with us.
Whoa, Nellie. Fancy decorations, Mary. Ready for parents' day.
Celebration, can feel a good vibration from the coming generation. It's the year of the child. No matter what the nation, love is not a thing you ration. Give them something to have faith in. It's the year of the child.
NBC invites you to join us in a rededication to the welfare of children around the world in the International Year of the Child.
It's the year of the child.
Now, Ronald Jay Cohen, the author of Binge. It's not a state of hunger, it's a state of mind. What's a binge?
A binge is going to be relative to every person, Tom. For you, it could be 1 Twinkie. For me, 2 Twinkies. But it's an undisciplined food spree that has kind of a compulsive quality to it.
And we don't do that because we're hungry, do we?
No, a lot of people think they do. Most people think they have an awareness of it, and they think they're aware of their hunger. But they're not. In my private practice, somebody can come into my office and I'll ask them a simple question like, what are your problem foods? The most common answer I get is everything. It simply isn't true. People don't binge on salmon croquettes, for example.
No, I wouldn't do that. Broccoli, I don't.
Broccoli.
No, broccoli, Brussels sprouts. I would not go crazy on that.
Sometimes.
Liver, I wouldn't go ape over, you know what I mean?
No. And one woman, when I asked her that question, she said, my problem is she's a real comedian. She said, my problem's seafood. I see food and have to eat it. But that gives you an idea that most people aren't aware of their eating habits at all.
Seafood and have to eat it.
Seafood and
Does anybody have a pencil here?
Most people are eating not out of hunger, but out of loneliness, anger, depression, fatigue, all these negative feelings. And the reason for that is hunger is probably the most primitive, negative emotional state. Food is the most primitive tranquilizer. Long before there was all these drugs floating around here, there was food, and food in large quantities.
Around where?
Oh, I just came out of the green room, and what people are drinking in there, I didn't, you know.
Oh, okay.
I had to stay away from that before I came.
But I know what you're saying. A lot of times, if people are bored, oh, let's have a sandwich. Let's go have an ice cream sundae. And they aren't eating because they want that particular item of food, but rather it's a substitute for doing something else because they might be bored or they might be frustrated.
Sometimes, speaking of frustration, there are even deeper reasons for it. You have to ask, what is the consequence for not binging? It's a question that's not very seldom asked. In other words, a lot of people think if they stay on a diet or if they stay on a sensible eating plan and they lose weight, that's all the time good. And for a lot of people, it's not. It works very strange ways. I'll give you a quick example. One of my patients, every time she lost weight, very, very attractive woman, every time she lost weight, her husband had an extramarital affair. Now, this makes no sense whatever, Tom. I know.
Certainly doesn't. I think it would be the other way around.
Yes, you'd think that she was more attractive to him and more appealing to him. What we found out in therapy was happening. This was a very immature guy. His wife lost weight, very attractive woman, got a lot of attention from the opposite sex. He wanted to see whether he would get attention from the opposite sex, too. The difference was he acted on it, she didn't. Another case, a 57-year-old widow comes to my office and says...
I thought you were going to say she'd say to her husband, how about tonight? And he'd say no, and she says, fine, I'm going to go out and get something to eat, so that she would gain weight that way.
People do use food as a companion, and then they eat their companion. But another case, a 57-year-old widow comes
Moving right along. Yeah, look at that moon. And I'll tell you, I love Hollywood. Boy, look at that moon, yeah.
Yeah, but they said I could say that on the Tomorrow Show.
You can say anything you want out here.
Sure.
Anything you want.
Another case, a 57-year-old widow walks into my office and says...
You're a psychologist, right?
Yes, I am.
Is there anything you want to say on television?
I want to tell this story about a 57-year-old widow.
I thought maybe, you know, you were talking about that there's something that you came in here tonight determined to say, and they told you could say it.
This is turning into one of those shows where they have the person in the dock. You could say anything you want on television. One of those stuff. Anyway, may I tell this quick story about a very interesting dynamic happening?
You can tell that story if you want to tell that. You can tell any story you want to tell out here.
This 57-year-old widow, overweight, comes into the office and says, Dr. Cohen, I must lose weight. And the reason I must lose weight is my husband died a year ago. This is a serious story. My husband died a year ago. And I'm ready to have sex with other men. And
this is a serious story.
What if a man looks at the body of a 57-year-old overweight widow and goes, yuck? And that's why she came in. When we found out in treatment, she was actually very ambivalent. The husband had been the only man in her life, and she was eating as a result of her ambivalence, and also to keep men away. Many women keep pounds on as a way of keeping men away. It does two things. It makes them unattractive, and a lot of women feel sexy when they lose weight. They don't feel very sexy when they have weight on. There's a distinction. One is a fear of sexual intercourse, and one is a fear of promiscuity. A woman, a very happily married woman, every time she lost weight, she put it this way. She said, quote, my libido goes wild. She had extramarital affairs every time she lost weight. There are a lot of reasons, and you have to look at what's the consequence.
If the wife is on a diet, it's a reason for the guy to think, hey, wait a minute, huh?
Right. You have to ask, what's the consequence of the weight loss? And a lot of times it's negative. One patient I treated, every time she lost weight, she started dating dentists. You always have to ask, what's the consequence of that?
No, not with a 10-foot pole do I go near that one.
No, the thing is she had problems with them.
Now, the way to...
Wasn't anything about dentists.
Yeah, the way to get off these food binges, I understand, is a very simple series of steps involving awareness, action, attitudes.
Awareness, action, attitudes.
AAA.
The AAA program, it's not simple. I would never say anything is simple. In order to get control of problem eating, you have to get control of your life, and that's not simple. There are some stopgap techniques you could use, but if you're lonely, dealing with loneliness isn't simple. Dealing with boredom isn't simple. Anybody who gets on the air and says, you know, here, take this pill or go on this diet or do anything like that, here's this simple, easy, effective way to weight loss is kidding themselves because it's hard work, and for some of us, it's harder work than others. There are steps you can take.
But like I said, you know, losing weight or stopping food binges is not an easy thing to do. It's not simple. There's no surefire way to do it. But if you are aware of certain things, and if you take certain action and develop certain attitudes, the 3 A's again, right, in that particular order,
yes,
you got a leg up on getting it done, right?
First of all, you have to find out what type of binger are you. Are you a lone binger? That doesn't mean that you carry silver bullets. That means you binge alone. That means you have an exciting, intimate relationship with food.
This guy's fast. I want to tell you something.
It means that the psychology of the lone binger is, if I can't have a love affair with a person, I'm going to have one with chocolate chip cookies. Or if no one loves me, I'm going to love myself with food. A vengeful binger. There's a person who uses food as a kind of weapon.
You've been out with people who go to lunch with you and they'll say, I'll just have a salad, please. And they're like houses. They're so big.
Oh, of course.
They binge by themselves, and that doesn't count. They never eat that food.
No, I've done one better. They go out and they order a huge meal, and then they call the waiter over at the end of the meal. They say, do you have sweet and low? You know, it's the same thing. That's playing a game I call charades. What can you do? Okay, first of all, get an awareness. Find out which binge games you're playing. There's lots of them I describe. I think you have to approach this, obviously, with a little sense of humor. Otherwise, you walk around feeling guilty, feeling deprived.
Of course.
All these negative
Listen, can we pass through awareness, action, and attitudes and just do a couple of things like, because, you know, people will want the book. I'm going to call it Binge for short because if I give the title, I can't let you do it. But anyway, you've got a thing in there, the Gin Dummy.
Gin Dummy. Gin Dummy is a binge game that you go to someone's house, you're not really interested in drinking, but you're drinking simply to be sociable. Now, all players of that game get drinks, and the winner gets black coffee and a lift home.
That's Gin Dummy.
That's Gin Dummy.
Okay, what are some other ones moving around?
Oh, there are a lot of them. Love Thy Parents. This is when you go over your parents' house and show them how much you love them by binging over there. All players of that game get consolation care packages to take home with them. Ending it all. This is when you have just maybe a couple of donuts or a couple of potato chips in the house, and in order to start the diet of your lifetime, you have to end it all. If you could just get rid of those things, then everything will be okay. If I'm in the kitchen, I must be hungry. You have to understand, a lot of eating is classically conditioned. You get cravings. If someone's watching this show right now, and every night they watch Tom Snyder and they eat, they're going to salivate at the sight of Tom Snyder. Why? Because it's a classically conditioned response, just like Pavlov with the dogs. You take a dog off the street and you ring a bell, he's not going to salivate. But you keep pairing it with food, he's going to salivate. He's going to become hungry, if you will. He's going to think he's hungry when he's not. Why do you get a craving for popcorn when you go into a movie theater? Is there anything inherent about a movie theater? No, it's continued pairing. A few things about action that we should mention.
We should mention them. There's no question about that, but let me tell you why we're not going to mention them. Guess why? Go ahead.
You have to have me back.
That's why we're not going to mention it. We have to have you back. The man gave the correct answer. The book is called Binge. It's not a state of hunger. It's a state of mind. Its author is Dr. Ronald Jay Cohen. We'll be in touch with him setting up another appearance so we can go into these three things: awareness, action, and attitudes. Very important that they be done in that order, and it's not a simple thing. You're a good man.
We're going to go out for a drink, aren't we, Tom?
We don't have to go out. We got it right here. We'll be right back after this for the NBC television station. Stay with us.
If you are over age 50, you can receive free information about life insurance that requires no physical examination.